On today's Entrepreneurs at Scale podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Alan Miltz. Alan originates from South Africa, but has spent most of his career in Australia and now lives in the beautiful city of Melbourne. He was the founder of Matrix Limited, who developed financial analysis techniques that became the global standard for businesses, accountants, and over 500 global banks. He is now the chairman of Pearl Financial Services, and they work alongside businesses to help improve their cash flow and capital structuring to deliver greater financial performance. He is also the founder of Cashflow Story. This is based on the successful financial storytelling techniques that really help businesses and, more importantly, their team members make sense of their numbers. He wrote The Power of One chapter in the Scaling Up book by Vern Harnish and is one of the most on-demand speakers from around the globe when it comes to financial mastery. Alan, a very warm welcome.
And good morning from Australia to my dear friend Neil. I absolutely love coming to see you in London and presenting to your amazing customers. Always a pleasure, Neil.
It is just that, and it's a real joy to have you on today's podcast. So just tell me a little about yourself and your entrepreneurial journey.
Okay, so the accent has never gone. I'm a South African trained chartered accountant. In my opinion, I'm from the most beautiful city in the world, Cape Town, and went to school, university, and did my financial articles in South Africa at an international firm. And then in the midst of apartheid, I said to myself, is there going to be a future in South Africa, or should I explore the world? And traveled the world for a year. And by pure coincidence, I sat next to a wonderful gentleman on the plane, and he was the owner of a spree in Australia. And he said to me, I know your background in South Africa in finance. Your family had a very successful footwear factory. Why don't you come over to Australia and help set up Esprit Footwear? What a wonderful opportunity. So arrived in Australia, never been here before. And I loved the Australian humor. My first day in Australia, I tell the story often. Esprit was based in Melbourne. I arrived in Sydney and got into a Japanese bus tour by mistake. Sitting next to a charming Japanese gentleman, the bus stopped close to Darling Harbour. We got out, got lost, and the Japanese gentleman very politely stopped the first Aussie and said, excuse me, sir, we lost. Where do we find Darling Harbour? And the Aussie looked at him and said, mate, you managed to find Pearl Harbor. I'm sure you'll find Darling Harbour. And I realized Australia was going to be a great fun. So I worked at Esprit for a few years and then started to advise companies in the textile, clothing, and footwear sector. And whenever I went, it was amazing. I realized nobody really understood the numbers. The banks looked at numbers one way, business another way, and the accountants a third way. And three of us got together. We were all South African immigrants, all chartered accountants. And we said, surely we can create a standard by which everyone looks at numbers in a consistent way. So we started a company, and our target market initially was the banks. Every bank was using Moody's or S&P as their analysis tool. And these three young upstarts from South Africa, without much knowledge about global competition, started a banking technology company. We raised private equity from one of the wealthy families in Australia, and the journey began. And 25 years later, as you said in your introduction, over 500 global banks were using our system. Today, it's one of the biggest banking systems in the world. I made mistakes. I got diluted terribly along the journey by the amount of capital we raised, and then we sold too early. Two of us then got together and said, let's now focus on business. All about simplicity. Everyone needs to understand the story. And Cashflow Story was created about 6 or 7 years ago. Today, Cashflow Story is used in over 96 countries around the world, including the scaling up community. And if I had to give an analogy, one of the greatest sporting upsets ever, in 2016, Leicester City won the English Premier League. Odds were 5,000 to 1. How did Leicester City do it? Well, there were no silos. Everyone knew the game plan, every game. And after every game, the team discussed the power of one. How many 1% changes? So Cashflow Story is no different. Cashflow Story has been designed so that everyone in the management team understands the story. And using our technique, which we've called the power of one, how many 1% changes do we need to make to get to the profit, the cash, and the valuation we've all dreamt of? So my story has been dedicated to the love of numbers. My story has been dedicated towards simplicity. My goal is for every management team to say, I love the numbers, I understand them, and I actually know how to improve them using the power of one. So it's been a 25-year journey, Neil, and we're nowhere near starting.
Indeed, indeed. And I think, because I'll say, said simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. It was probably actually Einstein who said that. But just want to dial back a second, because you mentioned on that journey that you made mistakes, and we all make mistakes. What sort of mistakes did you make on reflection that have helped you grow out the business?
So interesting, when the three of us started our banking technology company, we had no external funding. So we were working as consultants, advisors to fund the development. And the first bank who we sold our software to was the National Australia Bank, one of the biggest banks in the world. And the lead times in selling into a bank could be three to 4 years. You sell technology into a complex company, they have very long lead times. So we're doing very little revenue, working like slaves, and S&P heard about the deal we had won. And the CEO of S&P called us up on a Friday afternoon, I'll never forget the call, and said, gents, your technology is unique. If we had to offer you $15 million, would you sell the company? And this is 25 years ago. And the three of us looked at each other and we said, imagine what we're going to get for this company when we get 10 banks. Let's raise some capital and we're going to go for the long haul. So the first lesson I learned, when you look at startup companies, the valuation in the beginning is often higher than it is 5-6 years later. Because how did S&P value our company? Absolutely no basis of valuation. We had no revenue. It was blue sky and the complexity of our technology. 5 or 6 years later, people would have said, let's see your revenue and your profit, and it would have been a different valuation. So if I had my time back, I spent 20 plus years in that business. Would I have done better selling my business after 2 or 3 years than going down the journey of 20 years? And my answer is yes, I would have done better. So it's always the grass is greener. And one of the sayings I say to every company is revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. I should have taken the money, and then as entrepreneurs, we would have recreated many other businesses. But on the dilution path, selling too early, trust me, I would have done a lot better by not being greedy in the beginning.
Interesting. It reminds me, we had a conversation on a previous podcast, I think it was with John Ratcliffe, who talks about Rembrandt's in the attic. And it's about just actually forget normal valuation. Most businesses have got some unique value added thing that they may see or may not see, but certainly it sounds like S&P certainly could see the Rembrandts in your attic.
And the longer the time went, the more unique our business became to a specific number of buyers.
Yeah. Just also dialing back, I think you mentioned when you...
I would rather not say the amount, but it makes me sick when every time I hear the valuation. So the answer is, by the end of the day, and a lot of companies a lot of presentations I do, and I say to people here, who of you have raised private equity? And a lot of people put up their hand, and then I say, how many rounds have you raised? What's your equity left in the business? And often what's happened is that the founders, they don't have control anymore because the control is in the person who put the money. And your stake in the business is so diluted that your investor decides to sell when they want to sell, not when you want to sell. Yeah. And you're probably reporting to a person by now.
Yeah, definitely. Now, when you started out in Australia, you sound like you had some sort of mentor almost, who from the family business who gave you some advice. And I'm sure when you and I have talked, you've kind of come up with some of those key areas of advice for entrepreneurs or unwritten rules or whatever. That just remind me of some of those.
So my father had a large footwear manufacturing plant. We employed 1,000 people making upmarket ladies' shoes. So my father wasn't university trained, but he understood about measure twice, cut once, because leather is a very expensive commodity. It's expensive to make mistakes. But what I learned from my family business was hard work and persistence and never give up. And arriving in Australia, Neil, I can tell you, you arrive here with 2 suitcases, you don't know anyone, and you think, wow, my name means nothing. I'm an absolute number in this country, which is beautiful. How am I going to make it? And it's absolutely knocking on doors every day, not understanding the meaning of no. It's that persistence and belief in yourself and surrounding yourself with the best people. So as immigrants, we learned the art of hard work and the art of listening and just meeting as many people. And today I look at my network, and I've got a network today around the world that is so big and so strong. And it's come from one concept. I'm never scared to get on a plane. I don't like Zoom. So when people say to me, let's have a Zoom meeting, my first option is, can I face-to-face meet that person? Because the relationship you will form is very different. And one other person who I met on my travels gave me the best words of advice ever for immigration. Was an Indian gentleman living in Russia. And I said to him, what is an Indian doing living in Russia? And he said to me, I'm going to tell you something. If you don't love the country will never love you. And as soon as I heard that, I never compared Melbourne to Cape Town. I said, let me see how beautiful this place is. And the place started to love me. And my advice for anyone, if you don't love the place you're in, the place will never love you. So I've had some great words. And then obviously through my journey, meeting people like Vern Harnish, becoming part of the scaling up community and meeting some incredibly, firstly to me, the scaling up methodology out of all of the methodologies I see in the world is another level. And I've met some incredible coaches, including yourself, who are so passionate about what they do. So I've been absolutely privileged in my journey to have been exposed to some of the best in the world.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's beautiful advice, just going back to about loving the country. And I think as entrepreneurs as well, if you are to to grow out, you've also got, I guess, I think selfishly, love yourself to some degree. If you're going to be able to have the confidence and whatever it takes to succeed, how do you go about staying on top of your game? How do you go about being the best that you can be?
Well, firstly, I love learning. So whether I'm a great reader, I prefer listening. I'm a much better listener. So I do listen to a lot of Audible books, and I attend a lot of conferences, and I meet some incredible CEOs. And my ability is, when I meet someone, the first thing as a leader is I'm a good listener. And listen and silent are the same letters. So when I meet someone who I really respect, I'm actually silent because I'm listening. And when I listen to people, I listen with empathy. So LEA, E is for empathy. When you talk to someone, take off your shoes when you talk to them and put on their shoes. So for example, I've spent my whole life making people love the numbers. The people I'm talking to are not accountants. They're not trained in finance. So everything we've done is about simplicity. And what we say is, let's take away jargon and let's talk to people in a language they understand, called improvement. So every technique that I've created has got one filter. How would a non-financial person understand this? And like Leicester City, imagine if everyone in your company understands the story. Like Leicester City, using the power of one, we can achieve miracles. And I absolutely love going into businesses. And I see when I first walk in, people have got their arms crossed. They're against what I'm going to say. And as I get into explaining the story, in the end, they say, I can do this. I understand our story. I cannot wait to fix it. So every one of your listeners today, whether they a CEO or the management team, the numbers belong to you. So, for example, price and volume are owned by the sales and marketing team. Cost of goods belong to the operational people. It's about showing what the numbers mean and then having a discussion at every meeting. What can we do to improve it? And this is not a discussion with the accountant. It's a discussion with everyone on your management team. And that's my mission in the world today, is to enable your management team to absolutely love and embrace the numbers. And I can give you a process to do that. And the process is around simplicity.
Yeah. And it's really interesting as well, because again, talking about languages, I'm sure you've mentioned in the past that if you are a bank, you kind of speak the language, maybe Portuguese, and often it's the entrepreneurs and the accountants who speak Spanish. You're kind of similar, but actually in a totally different way. What do you mean by that? Why that analogy?
So every business I go into talks to me about their profit. Every bank talks to me about the capacity of a customer to repay, debt service capacity. You will never understand cash or debt service capacity by looking at your profit. So we came up with a concept called the 4 chapters. A story of numbers is like reading a book. Chapter 1, most businesses get your revenues, your margin, your profit. But equally important is your balance sheet. And in your balance sheet, chapter 2, there are 3 items everyone in the management team needs to understand. Are we collecting properly? Is our inventory control correct? Or in a service company, do we invoice the work we do frequently enough or in advance? And do we have the right terms with our suppliers? Chapter 2, the 3 items, receivables, inventory, WIP or payables, is called working capital. The rest of the balance sheet are called chapter 3. It's called other capital. The result of a business is cash flow, the movement in your bank accounts, your cash. So what I'm saying to companies, If you want to love your business, you need to become a 4-chapter storyteller. It's almost as if give someone a murder mystery to read. When they read chapter 1 of a murder mystery, they never know who commits the crime. You read chapter 1 of your story, your profit, you'll never know the result of your story called cash. And I'm saying to everyone, a story of numbers is 4 chapters. Everyone in your company on one piece of paper, through education, I could teach them the 4 chapters. And then you and the bank speak the same language called cash flow excellence.
Very powerful. And of course, I guess going back to that notion you made about revenue is vanity and profit is sanity, so many entrepreneurs, like to not boast, but, talk about how well they're doing and turnover is growing, profitability is growing. But one of the things that you talk about in your scaling up chapter in terms of Power of One is the dreaded hospital division, and that Gary finds himself in. How on earth do people get into a place where actually they believe they're doing really well, but actually the banks are seeing a very different story?
Because a lot of companies we meet, they look at their profit and their revenue's growing, their profit's growing, but they're growing broke. And in other words, a story of numbers is told over 4 chapters. You're profitable, but chapter 2, your working capital, and chapter 3 are out of control. And it's almost stealing the money that you generated in your profit. And about 30 to 40% of companies I see, volume is detrimental to cash. And the company keeps on growing. Then the company calls me up and says, the bank's coming to see us, they don't understand my business. And I say to the company, no, the bank knows your cash flow every day. It's the movement in your bank accounts. You don't understand cash, the bank does. When the bank's worried about you, it means you've got a cash problem. When the bank's worried about you, you should be worried about you. You should be having a strategy before the bank comes in of how you're going to fix the cash problem. And that's where, Neil, the absolute heart, if you said to me, out of everything you've ever developed over the last 30 years, what is the one thing that you want to be known for? It's the 7 levers of the Power of One. There are only 7 things a company can do to improve their profit, their cash, and the value. Price, volume, margins, and overheads. So there are 4 drivers in profitability. Chapter 2, collect quicker, better manage your inventory or invoice more frequently, and negotiate the best terms with suppliers. How many 1% or one-day changes does your company need to make to hit your cash flow requirement? So cash flow is the result. The inputs are the 7 levers. Jim Collins, in the book Good to Great, one of his best concepts is called the flywheel. And Jim Collins, in the book Good to Great, when he interviewed companies who went from good to great, all their answers were innocuous. When Jim said, when did your company go from good to great? They all looked at him and said, I don't know. We came to work and we made good decisions every day, and it was just the repetition of these decisions. And he called it the flywheel. I get phone calls or emails every day of my life. A company says to me, my cash flow's improved. I phone them up and I say, when did it happen? They say to me, I don't know. But every day in every transaction, we put it through a filter of the 7 levers. And we made these 1% and one-day changes in every transaction. Before we knew what hit us, our cash flow was better. So I'm saying to everyone listening today, the DNA of your company is the Power of One. Everyone listening, however non-financial you are, could understand the concept of pricing, volumes, margins, overheads, collecting better managing inventory or invoicing your work, and payable terms. what I love, Neil, is visiting London, and you get on the train or you get on the underground, and what do they say at every train stop? What's the announcement they make?
Mind the gap.
Mind the gap. My message to every business is how many 1% changes or one-day changes do you need to make to get your company running in color code green? Mind the gap in your company. Everyone needs to know what success looks like.
And I guess it's one of those areas where it doesn't necessarily just need to be, the senior team. Everybody can get to work on the power of one, can't they?
Absolutely. So often I do the power of one, and people say, my sales team, because the three biggest problems facing the world today, and I'm sure the same is in the UK, ability to attract and retain people, supply chain, and inflation. Never before has cash been more important. So what's happening because of supply chain and inflation? Margins are dropping. You probably need to hold more stock if you're an importer, distributor, manufacturer, and you probably need to pay your suppliers faster to secure that inventory. What you should be then saying is, these are the three negatives that have happened in my business. Which other levers can I pull in the power of one to mitigate it? So sales team, our margins have dropped. This is the cash flow impact. How much could we put prices up by? What can we do to educate customers to pay us better? Maybe we need to hold extra inventory, so volumes should be growing. All of a sudden, when people understand your story, putting up prices doesn't become a barrier, it becomes a weapon. And that's what I'm finding. When people know your story, they become part of your solution. And the more you teach your team, the better they become in solving your problems.
And one of the probably least known areas and strategies is around pricing and understanding the dynamics of pricing. And I guess one of the massive benefits of Power of One is being able to demonstrate that if you put up prices by 2 or 3%, actually you can afford for volume to go backwards and buy a fair bit, and you're still ahead on cash and operating profit.
So I'm going to ask your listeners a question. If they cannot answer this question, they've got a major blind spot in their company. What is the relationship of price to volume to cash flow in your company? So in other words, how many times more sensitive is price to volume to the impact on cash? So put prices up by 1%. What does it do to your cash flow? Sell 1% more. What does it do to your cash flow? How many times more sensitive is price to volume? And I can tell you, I'd be surprised if anyone in this audience is saying, I get it. And I'm then saying, if you don't get it, you've got a blind spot. If your people don't understand what they're doing every day to your business. So cash flow is the result. When you grow, there's cash flow impacts. When you decline, there's cash flow impacts. But if you don't teach your management team how to play the game called cash, they're making decisions that might be bad. They might make decisions that are good. Imagine if everyone knew in advance the impact of their decision. You think they wouldn't make a different decision? And that's how we improve profit, cash, and value.
Very powerful. And I think the other thing that's really powerful is around scenario planning. The cash flow story software gives you the ability to say, what if we did put up our prices by 4%? And you see in real time the impact on cash and on operating profit. And what if we do decide that we can actually take volume back a bit? And what is it? And you see it in real time.
So Neil, I sit on the board of about 20 companies around the world. Whenever I join a board meeting, one of the first questions I say to the CEO is, if someone came in 3 years' time with a checkbook, how big does it need to be? In other words, what valuation do you want for your company in 3 years? And then I do a valuation on the company today, a high-level valuation. And I say to them, okay, now you understand the gap we need to fix. Let's go back year by year and see how we're going to do it. And then you look back and you say, wow, that valuation is very much in our grasp. So a valuation is based upon three key numbers: your profit, your multiple, and when you sell the business, do you have debt? In other words, you don't sell your debt when you sell your business. Now, each one of those inputs into a valuation you can control. So my goal is to grow the multiple by achieving at least double industry benchmark, so people will pay you a higher multiple. And often what companies don't realize is that every year, how much value have we created as a team? So whenever I have a board meeting, I always at the end of the year say, let's look back for the year. What's our valuation today? What did we have at the beginning of the year? Have we as a management team, a board, created the value we should have? So when you say to me, what does a good advisor, consultant, board member look like? A person who can scale your profit, your cash, and your valuation.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'm absolutely full with you. And I think more and more now, our value proposition as coaches is all about helping organizations maximize their value. And again, through the scaling up operating system that you talked about a bit earlier on, the Cashflow story software, I think I'm right in saying you've also got within the software like a business valuation indicator. So that's probably talking to what you've just been speaking about.
Absolutely. So in our software has been designed around not reporting, but improvement. So the first part of the software, there are 9 chapters in the software, or 9 components. The first 5 is your story, the summary, chapter 1, profit, then chapter 2, working capital, chapter 3, other, giving you cash. And then the rest of the software is about improvement, the power of one, valuations, projections, etc. So it's all about improvement. And our goal is for everyone around the team to, step 1, understand the story, and then have the discussion around what can we now do to improve the story. And you do that every quarter. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Like the flywheel that Jim Collins beautifully describes. Your financial flywheel starts to turn. And before you know what's hit you, it's spinning. And your business is producing above industry benchmark profit, the cash flow you want, the bank loves you, and your valuation is growing.
You talked a few minutes ago about some of the headwinds that we're all facing up to around the world right now. What's your advice you're giving to your management boards right now in terms of getting prepared for maybe an economic downturn?
So the first thing I'm saying is understanding your numbers and what they mean. If we got problems, obviously we need to be very close. So how do we build a partnership with our bank? Banks might not know about importing, distributing hair care products or whatever, but banks understand budgeting and forecasting. Is our money in a safe set of hands? So I ensure that all our stakeholders are on board with our business and we are a safe set of hands. Lesson number 1, no surprises. When I walk into a company and there's a surprise, that's a major problem for me. It means, so the traits of a good leadership team, ability to predict, ability to delegate, and repeat, repeat, repeat. And that's why one of the philosophies that I've adopted is that everyone has the right to be heard in a non-threatening way. The truth will be told, but no surprises. Tell us the bad news, and we'll solve it in a non-threatening way, but no surprises. Because so many times you walk into meetings and people love to dish you up the good news. I'm saying, tell me the bad news. Let's solve it in a non-threatening way, but no surprises.
Very sage advice indeed. And at this stage of our podcast, we always just like to reflect a bit in terms of a bit more about yourself. And what book are you reading right now, or what podcast are you listening to that's adding massive value to you?
So you will laugh, Neil. I've got right in front of me, and this is not staged. This is an absolute cold call with Neil.
Yes.
I'm reading probably for the 10th time.
Get out of it. Is that the latest edition?
This is the latest, and Vern very kindly sent me this book. It's dated the 25th of October, 2022, and it says, Alan, cash is king, from Vern.
Yes, it is. And by the way, for all listeners who have read Scaling Up, I'm sure there are a lot of you, Vern has just rewritten the book, and I'm sure putting even more focus in the importance of cash. And there's a supplementary chapter all around the exit, which is very present given what we've talked about today. So knowing what you know now, what is the number one piece of advice you would give to an entrepreneur setting out on their journey today?
Make the power of one implemented and understood by your management team. The numbers belong to you, the CEO. This is not about producing financial statements. You, the CEO, if you're doing your job correctly, you need to optimize your profit, ensure the company is building a fortress balance sheet through cash flow, and your valuation is going up. Make the numbers part of your business and make improvement part of your management team. So revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. Don't be scared of the numbers.
Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure and delight to have you join us today on the Entrepreneurs at Scale podcast. Many thanks indeed for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Neil, and cannot wait to visit London again or the UK again.